So joining us now on Open Book is someone I consider a friend and a patriot and a best-selling author. He's the former chief of staff for the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. He's a national security expert. He's written a couple of books. His recent book is called Blowback, A Warning to Save Democracy from the Next Trump. Miles became very famous when he wasn't famous, of course, because he had written the New York Times article under the title of Anonymous, and then he wrote a book, Anonymous, which was describing to the American people from inside the Trump administration the danger of Donald Trump. And so obviously, you and I have shared that commonality. We wanted to go work for the government and help our government serve the American people, and saw things that were out of control that we both felt compelled to talk about. So obviously, I admire you a great deal, Miles. This new book, A Warning to Save Democracy from the Next Trump, is phenomenal. And I'm going to tell you what, Anonymous was great, but I love the fact that your name is on this book, and I love the fact that you are very candid about everything, including you yourself, which I heartily recommend to people, particularly young people, to read this book, because it is a real basic guidebook on what to do and how to do it and how to serve your country in a patriotic way. So thank you for writing it. It takes guts to do the things that you've done. Take us back to 2018, your anonymous New York Times article. And I've heard you say in other interviews that you sort of feel like you contributed negatively by making it anonymous in terms of people's trust in government. Explain that to us, Miles. Explain to us where you were in 2018, the thought process there, and where you are today in 2023, your thought process.
Anthony, it's a great question, and I'm not going to let you interview me that way without first addressing you and how awesome you have been throughout this process. I promise I'll answer your first question, but in the spirit of being real, and just candid and not going on shows and doing talking points, you and I had a phone conversation after the election in 2020 when I was still living in this safe house that I talk about in the book, the place I basically had to escape to as things just got worse and worse. And honestly, I did not know what I was going to do next in my life, because my life had blown up. And I will never forget, it was nighttime. I was sitting on the balcony of this high rise, this totally nondescript, boring ass, horrible safe house in Northern Virginia. And the Wi-Fi signal was best on the balcony. And I had my laptop positioned in the dark, and we talked from sunset until it was dark. And I think just the laptop screen was the only thing lighting up my face. And I was asking you what you thought I should do next. And you were really blunt with me. And you said, just keep telling the truth. And boy, did that stick with me, because writing this book, no bullshit, was really hard to do. It was hard to every day be thinking about how grim a second Trump term could be, but I felt an obligation to try to paint that picture very lucidly and not hyperbolically, but also hard to relive some of the really traumatic pieces. So I actually don't know, Anthony, if in saying that I should tell you that I hate you or that I love you for encouraging me to do that. But I think it's the latter. And I really want to.
But I get it, because I sometimes have self-loathing. I get it, because you're saying stuff and you're like, there's a weird thing going on in our society now. People are punished for honesty and they're praised for conjecture and talking points. Like if you were if you were the CEO of a publicly traded company and I was your successful communications director, not the failed one that I was in the White House, but if I was a successful one, I'd be telling you to say nothing. Go on the air. Here's your homogenized talking points. Walk off the air so that people feel you didn't say anything. Don't be offensive to anybody. Okay, but you're out there and you're explaining to people that the country is under threat. The country is under threat, not just from Donald Trump, but from a cabal of people that want to end the democracy. They don't like the rules anymore. Either the demographics changed and it became less of a white country, and so we don't want the brown and black people to be in power, so let's change the rules, or we don't like certain parts of our culture, or we don't like certain people that have different sexual orientations than ourselves, or who knows, even some of that's maybe closeted fear-based stuff that goes on. I don't know what it is, but we reward people for not telling the truth, and we hit people like you with a shotgun blast for telling the truth, Miles. So
Well, I'll give
why
you.
is
I'll give you
that? You think? I'm right. First of all, do you agree with that assessment, or that am I off the mark?
Completely.
Okay, so why is that?
And well, I'll give you an answer, and I'll start with an anecdote. There's a lot of fear today about being on the wrong side of your listeners or your viewers, and that doesn't just apply to a TV show host or a podcaster. I mean, like everyday Americans. Your listeners or your viewers are your friends and your family, and there's people around you, or the people watching your Snapchats or TikToks. Folks are just really terrified of getting canceled and pushed out of their tribe, whatever their tribe is. And it changes their behavior. And I'll give you an example, and I won't say who this is because I do highly respect the person, but I was on a cable news show in the past couple of days, and someone who's got a left-leaning show who I think felt that they, even though they had me on, I'm still a former Republican, and I served in the Trump administration, so there's still got to be a zinger in there. And they came after me on Trump's reprehensible family separation policy and said, you were at the Department of Homeland Security when this happened. Do you want to apologize to the families? And I'll tell you, Anthony, that fucking sucked, because the true story is I was one of the few people in the federal government trying to stop that policy. And in fact, I was the guy who co-wrote the executive order that we put in front of Trump to tell Jeff Sessions to go pound sand and that it was over. But a lie gets halfway around the world before the truth can put its pants on. In fact, the truth is probably still just totally asleep in the digital age as the lie laps the planet. And I give you this example not because anyone needs sympathy for me. Obviously, you and I going into the Trump administration, people were going to say, well, therefore, the fact that you were there means you must own these policies and refuse the intellectual exercise of actually digging deeper and asking, what actually did you do when that thing happened? But I think people posture because there is a fear that if they don't do what their tribe is expecting, that they themselves will get attacked. And it leads to, I think, intellectual dishonesty, but more than anything, it leads people to really misrepresent their views. So let me be more specific about this. In the book, in Blowback, I talk about how there have been recent surveys that show that everyday Americans, the moderate majority, is now self-centering, that people misrepresent their views in public and have very different views in private, especially on politics. What's scary to me is the cohort that doesn't do that are the political extremes, especially on the far right. People on the far right will tell you in public what they say in private. And so if we've got the majority that are moderate just shutting themselves up, then it really is definitionally the extremes driving the debate. And you pair that with studies that show that I think it's something like 75% of the conversation on Twitter was being driven by the 8% most ideological voters and social media users. The stats plus or minus a few percentage points, but Jonathan Haidt cites that in one of his books. And it literally shows that the extreme elements are the ones driving the conversation, and it makes it harder and harder for people to speak out. I think the only way you counter that is, frankly, you just refuse to shut up. I mean, so for instance, I could have curled up in this hotel room bed yesterday that is still kind of messy after that shitty cable news hit. But again, I respect the anchor. It was a good person. I think they were trying to get to a good question. But if I just let bad moments like that shut me up, well, then the other side, the MAGA guys, win, because then I'm not out there talking about the dangers of a second Trump administration. So I guess that's to say, in this environment, you got to kind of take the crap a little bit, because it makes it that much easier for the next person to come forward and less scary for them to speak out.
I agree. There's going to be however, though, there is a group of people, no matter what you say or how honest you are, there's just a group of people, because you work for Donald Trump, they're just going to negate you. That's part of their virtue signal. They have to. You work for Trump, you're definitionally bad, even though you were a force for good inside the administration, even though you were attempting to protect the American people. General Kelly is a personal friend of mine and a personal friend of yours. We both know why our friend General Kelly left, which I'd like to go into if you don't mind, but also take our listeners behind closed doors with Donald Trump and why he's not the representative of the GOP, but yet you have these jellyfish that could have put him right through the ropes after January 6th, but rather than do that, they flew down to Mar-a-Lago to do photo ops with him. What is it about his personality that scares these people? And tell us a little about General Kelly, your experience with Pompeo or Kevin McCarthy.
Yeah. Well, and I'll answer that by explaining actually why I went into the administration. And hopefully this merges your first question with the second question.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, please.
That is, I was really opposed to Trump early in 2015 and 2016 when he emerged onto the presidential scene. He just didn't seem like a conservative to me, didn't seem like a Republican. And I didn't want to see him be president. And in the last days of the election, I sort of frantically tried to get members of Congress that I was working with in the House of Representatives, I was a staffer at the time, tried to get them to rescind their endorsements. And I started to see inklings of the answer to your question in the responses I got. Is members of Congress sort of blew me off or made jokes, and none of the ones I tried to get to rescind their endorsements did, even though after the Access Hollywood tape, it seemed like there was abundant reason to distance themselves from the guy. And I couldn't figure it out. I thought, at a minimum, it's going to be politically beneficial for these people to say they stood on the right side of history when Donald Trump inevitably loses. But even if he had lost, I don't think those people would have regretted not rescinding their endorsements. Why? Because they didn't want to break from the tribe. And rescinding their endorsement from Trump would have made it look like they weren't a team player in the Republican Party, and they would have been chided for that. And these guys value their tribal affiliation more than anything in their lives. I mean, I sincerely think in some cases they care more about their tribal affiliation with the GOP than they do the livelihoods or the welfare of their families. And I say that because when John Kelly came onto the scene, I saw a very different attitude. And he got nominated by Trump to be Secretary of Homeland Security. I'd loosely known him in his time at U.S. Southern Command because he'd come up and testified on Capitol Hill. We'd engaged with him. And I had immense respect for him. And in those early conversations with Kelly and his transition team, it was clear he was going into the administration with a very different perspective, not trying to suck up to Donald Trump and endorse him, but frankly, from a position of grave concern about whether this man was capable of being commander in chief. And at that point, I'd actually been offered several jobs in the White House. And, that would have been a dream to, I think back to 10-year-old Miles Taylor. He would have said, what the hell are you thinking? You're not going to take a job in the White House? This is your dream. But I knew it would be career suicide to be that close to that guy. And it was obvious to everyone he was a pretty bad man. And so I didn't take the job in the White House. But when I spoke to Kelly, I thought, okay, this is a guy who legitimately wants to come in and keep the wheels on the wagon. And maybe there's a shot to do that if I'm working for him and not working for the big guy. And so I did say yes to that and went in and joined him. And like you, maintain immense respect for John Kelly. I rarely go through social media comments because people are such jackasses. But, occasionally I do. And I don't know, not too long ago, I posted something John Kelly said. And, there were people out there, how can you like General Kelly? And he enabled this guy. I'm going to tell folks right now, I don't care what your opinion is. I know the man. He's one of the most moral people I've ever met in Washington. And he threw his whole body and his career on a grenade. And troll comments like that actually justify what I just said, because he knew he would be villainized by people who would never understand why he stayed in that administration. But I sincerely think we could have gotten into a nuclear war when Donald Trump was president. That was a non-zero possibility. And people like Kelly being around prevented that. Now, at the end of the day, I'll be very self-critical. I think we were deluded in thinking we could keep him in check. And we ended up failing at the end of the day because he's just simply replaced the people who tried to keep him in check. And I was highly responsible for spreading that fantasy that unelected bureaucrats could protect us from Trump. I'm guilty as charged of that. But till my dying day, I will say people don't know the full extent of what John Kelly did to protect this country. And I just admire it immensely.
Yeah. And listen, he fired me. Okay. That was like his first official act, was to fire me. Okay. And I was a little sore at him in the beginning. We were both a little sore, but I think once we got each other's vibe, we became very close friends. And I think that's the important thing. If you're committed and you're a patriot, and what I would say about you and John Kelly, you guys are patriots first, partisans second, or maybe even partisans deep last, but you're patriots, through the whole alphabet, if you will, down to the letter Z. But
can I interject, yeah, Anthony, to throw that right back at you? But I'll say to listeners, just so they don't think I'm blowing smoke up your ass, that my opinions of you were influenced by the chief, at first. And I remember the day that we swore him in the Oval Office, and you were in there, and Kellyanne and Jared and others, and I'm pretty sure that in fact, this is how I remember. You tell me if you remember it differently. We went into the Roosevelt room to celebrate after Trump swore him in, which was sort of funny because it was more, I describe it in the book, like a funeral wake and not a celebration, because we were so upset at DHS to lose him. And we also knew it was going to be, he was not looking forward to being the chief of staff to the president, to put it lightly. But he didn't come into the Roosevelt room. And I was like, well, where the hell is he? And I'm pretty sure one of the first things he did was, after he walked out of the Oval, you and him, had a pull-aside conversation where I think it was discussed that you would be leaving. And, when that became public that you'd left the administration, I thought, here he is, cleaning house of these Trumpers that are in there. And since that time, this, I've come to have just the highest opinion of you possible. You're just an exceptional patriot, a family man. You're so generous, incredibly, even to your critics. It's amazing. I've learned so much from you, but that's because there was a willingness to, open the door back up and have conversations, which people don't do anymore. They don't re-engage someone that they had a caricature of. And I think you were the one to reach out to me several years ago, and I was just floored by it. So anyway, that was all a way of saying that.
Look, it's nice to say. I mean, you are a nice person. That's not actually what happened. He called me into his office and said, "You're fired." And he said, "I'm cleaning house and I need my own comms director. You're not going to be it." And he gave me my marching papers. Okay. I got up and I shook his hand. I said, "I totally respect that. You're the chief." He then admitted to me, which was, I have to tell you, I had a lot of respect for. He said, the minute that Trump said that I was reporting directly to him, there's no way that you can have the comms director report directly to the president and not through the chief of staff. And he said, even though you're willing to do that, that wouldn't work. You would just, the idea that was in the memo. Mm-hmm. And, listen, obviously the thing I said about Bannon, which, I think it's one of the best things I've ever said in my life. Actually, I had no problem with it.
Totally
to go over. This is not an R-rated podcast, but I think it was literally one of the more legendary comments. And by the way, as General Kelly now admits to me, I was right. Bannon was one of the more malevolent cretins in our society. And so the thing I would say about Bannon, Miles, is that he understands and can articulate Trump's worldview because he's a student of history. But what I also say to my atheist friends out there, if you don't believe in God, you should. And let me provide evidence why there is a God. Because Bannon is smart. He's charismatic. He's well-read. He has a malevolent worldview that Trump shares. But God made Steve so ugly. Okay, he made him so ugly that we don't take him seriously, thank God, right? He looks like, he's got the rosacea of an alcoholic and he dresses in contemporary hobo. Okay, thank God. So you
Hobo
have to
chic.
thank
I
God
think
for
it's hobo
you know,
chic.
hobo chic. You have to thank God for that. So, but go to these guys in your book. Go to McCarthy, Pompeo. Go to the Republicans in the book. What has you torqued up or not torqued up about those guys?
It's not personal for me anymore. It was for a period. There was a period of time where I felt deeply personally let down by these people. The McCarthys and the Pompeos, who I witnessed in private express very candidly their views of the former president. Their very negative views of the former president, the things that we all know to be true. I mean, I don't even need to catalog what they thought, because they just thought what we all thought. He's an observably stupid, unhinged person, and anyone who can't see that is clearly trying to get something and has some kind of agenda. I mean, genuinely, I've yet to meet the person that's in our political system in the Republican Party who really authentically admires Donald Trump. I don't know who that is. And there is no actual mega MAGA. There's just mega climbers and the people who keep their opinions to themselves and hope they won't draw his ire. And so it was a lot of personal disappointment in folks like that I looked up to. And now it's just, I feel like I've got to find the people who are willing to be flipped, because they are so valuable. I do think that, I'll give you an example. Another person who I didn't used to be friends with, and now I just think the world of, is Stephanie Grisham. Stephanie made my life a living hell when she was press secretary and coming out against me when I was criticizing the president and all that
She
stuff.
went after me. She went after me too.
Yeah. But you know what? When she turned on Trump, I thought, this is such a gift, because she's such a credible messenger. She was in the MAGA movement. She was at least a true believer in the populism. She may not have been a true believer that Donald Trump was a man of character. And now she's really seen the ugly underbelly of it, and she can go message to those communities. And I think people like Stephanie helped folks break away from the tribe and are useful messengers. So that's where my focus is now, is trying to find those Republicans who I know have an opinion in private that they might be willing to express in public, and try to lower that cost for them. Some of those people you mentioned, I don't think Kevin McCarthy, I don't think it'll ever happen, sadly. I saw some inklings of it with Pompeo recently, and it's sad to me, because I personally had I got to tell you, I mean, at one point I told Mike Pompeo that I thought he should be president of the United States before Donald Trump was elected. I mean, he was no one knew him as a member
gifted
of
guy.
I was like, you are like the Tony Soprano of politics, but with a moral code. I just freaking loved Pompeo. And, he was a sophomore congressman and I was a junior staffer. And I was just like, you are the guy. Like, let's get you there, and wanted to help him angle into good chairmanships and a future in the party. But then to watch him as Secretary of State know these same things that I knew, and be in a more important position, a vastly more important position than me, and have a microphone, and not then use that to tell people the truth about the danger in the Oval Office. That was a deeply disappointing thing. And I continue to be disappointed, but I'm not taking it so personally anymore. I'm more focused on, okay, who can we get to actually speak the truth, and how do we make it easier for them to speak the truth?
And we agree, and I like Mike a lot, but I do think that, but he falls into the category of many of them. So, what do you think of this current crop of presidential candidates and the 2024 primary season? And if you don't mind, make a prediction for us.
It actually is mixed, because I am starting to see more criticism of Trump than I expected. I had a pretty grim view going in. I didn't think there would be any candidates outside of, people who don't have a shot that would be criticizing Trump. But Chris Christie may not have a shot, but we've seen the Christies, thankfully, just go full bore against Trump. And Christie, like a lot of us, is not undeserving of criticism. I mean, he really, really lent legitimacy to Donald Trump from the get-go and all the way through. But you know what? It's never too late to do the right thing. And I firmly believe in redemption. And by God, day by day, Christie is slowly redeeming himself in my eyes by going out there and being really blunt about Trump. And I actually will say it's more courageous than folks realize, because Christie's going in front of these audiences that are really conservative. He's going and standing in front of these folks that really, really love Trump. And he's telling them that Donald Trump is a psychopath. And that takes some guts, but we need more people doing that. So look, if I had to make a prediction about the field, and I'm going to paint a pessimistic picture right now, I think Donald Trump, despite another indictment that is imminent, will be the GOP nominee. I think he will be the GOP nominee. I don't think anything's going to change with Biden being on the ticket. You're going to have probably the most restless electorate you've ever seen in recent history. And that's saying something given what we went through in 2016 and 2020. And then the No Labels team is going to come out and offer a unity ticket that is really going to muck it up in unforeseeable ways. And potentially, if they don't do that right, and if they're not very cautious, could give Donald Trump a fast pass back into the Oval Office while there are cases proceeding against him. And then we are in constitutionally uncharted territory, because there's not a person on this earth that doesn't think that Donald Trump wouldn't pardon himself if he became president. And that, of course, would be challenged by the courts, but we don't know what would happen there. And I've asked the best constitutional scholars about that. And essentially their answer is a big question mark. And the fact that there isn't a clear resolution to that does mean constitutional crisis by definition. So we're not too many hops away from a possible massive constitutional crisis, but I will still hold out a little hope that one of these candidates opposed to him, Tim Scott or Chris Christie, will break out and be able to suppress Donald Trump's numbers in the primary states enough that the field can coalesce around them instead of him.
It's incredibly well phrased, and you are unfortunately likely to be right. So he is going to go through these trials and tribulations. He is the nominee. Do you think he could win it?
Yeah, I mean, I hate to say it. I think today, if it was just Trump versus Biden, I think Donald Trump wins. And certainly that's the last thing that I want to see. I mean, I just wrote a whole damn book trying to paint a picture of how bad a second term would be to convince people not to make that mistake. But I think that Democrats are highly unmotivated about Joe Biden, and they can get mad at me, but the numbers show it that a majority of Biden's voters are really, really unmotivated about his candidacy, I think at the highest levels we've ever seen for an incumbent. And a lot of the Republicans who defected from the GOP to support Biden, which just helped put him over the edge, the polls show a lot of them have gone back to the tribe. So Biden can't count on as many independents as he had before, or as many conservatives as he had before come in, coalition with him. And that really cuts in Trump's favor. And it's remarkable to think after everything that Trump has that possibility. But I think there's a real chance. And the betting markets don't totally agree with me. The betting markets still give Biden an edge right now, but not as much of an edge as you'd want. I mean, the other day I looked, and I think the odds makers gave Joe Biden a 38% chance of being the next president and Donald Trump a 32% chance. I mean, that's almost a coin flip. And one of
you're right. If they bring in a third party, it'll hurt. If they bring in a third party, Miles, it'll hurt Biden more than Trump, don't you think?
Yeah. And look, Anthony, you know this about me. I'm a real believer, actually, in third parties and competition in our democracy. I really hope in this century, and maybe it won't be until I'm retirement age, that we'll see a competitive multi-party democracy where there are many factions and there are more moderate parties, and the Democrats are still there and the Republicans, and we have more choice and competition. That will require a lot of democracy reform. But in this moment, a third party ticket, all else being equal, looks like it could spoil the election for Donald Trump and put him back in the White House, which is a very scary prospect to me. So I hope people who are considering that are at least thinking about talking to the White House first and seeing if there's a way to do some kind of negotiation before they enter into the fray.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's go to the personal side for a second. We both experienced some personal struggles coming out of the Trump. I mean, Deirdre and I almost got divorced. Thankfully, we were able to patch it up. It impacted my business. It's like, again, you don't get rewarded for telling the truth. People like Trump, they'll fire me. People that hated the fact that I was with Trump in the first place, they'll fire me. It's just the way it works. But we both had some struggle. Tell us a little bit about your struggles. You've had to hire bodyguards, you've moved locations. Give us a sense for the personal toll honesty has.
Well, you have experienced this as much or more than me, Anthony, and I'm glad that you flagged what you've gone through because, sometimes people will villainize you or I and say there's this magic word that's called grifters, and they'll say
Yes.
you're grifters,
Yeah.
and I always find it. I understand the inclination for people to do that because when they see you on television, they assume that being on television means you're just making a ton of money and you must be raking it in. And I really wish some of those people that level the accusation had been sitting there with me in a dingy apartment filing for unemployment in the months after I left the Trump administration. And I'm not embarrassed to say it. I think some people are embarrassed to say when they've been on welfare. I mean, when I was younger, we had some tough times as a family. And after the Trump administration, I did. I laid out for people, not for sympathy, but for clarity that, yeah, I lost my home and I lost my job and I lost the relationship that I was in and my personal security. And I had to blow my savings on lawyers and protective measures. Everything was detonated. And any one of those things is enough to push someone into a pretty dark place. And I had them all happen at once. And unsurprisingly, it did. It put me into a pretty dark place. And I developed an addiction to alcohol to cope with it and pills. And I did all of the things that you think are like bad movie tropes that I never would have imagined would happen. But I just needed to turn off reality because my reality became so barren after coming out against Trump because our political environment, the political intimidation and violence and discourse is so overwhelming. It just enveloped my life. And it wasn't just from the right. I mean, it was mostly from the far right. But in total candor, some of the people who individually were cruelest to me were people who had said they really wanted people to break out of Trump's orbit and oppose him. And then when some of us did, they savaged us and said, why didn't you do it sooner? Where the hell were you? Why did you go in? I mean, they kind of lumped everyone into a MAGA camp together.
Right.
And no one bothered to ask, did you even vote for Donald Trump? I didn't vote even for Donald Trump. But, you get lumped into that camp. And some of those people, and I don't need to name them, but really made life exceptionally difficult. So longer answer than you asked for, but staying in politics is the least financially beneficial decision I've ever made in my life. It's so detrimental.
I appreciate the answer so much because it's so honest. And, and obviously I share and have empathy for you because a lot of it has happened to me. I guess my thing that I tell people philosophically, you don't go into the NFL, put the helmet on, wear the jersey, and expect not to get a concussion, okay? Because, you're on the battlefield, you're going to get hurt, and that's you and me. Okay, so I love your book. You got a new podcast. It's called The Whistleblowers Inside the Trump Administration. Tell us about your new podcast.
Yeah, I'm excited about this. And again, lest anyone be confused on the grifter label, neither of these projects has paid me very much money. In fact, neither is sufficient enough to pay the bills. So, I have a day job working on nonprofit think tank stuff in Washington, D.C. But I was really flattered to get asked to do this pod. iHeartRadio wanted to do a series about people who spoke out inside of government. And they asked if I'd be willing to host it. And the honest story is I said, I don't want to just read the prompts. I don't just want to be a radio voice. I want to help you go find these people and tell the stories. And so we went and spoke to a whole bunch of folks all across the Trump administration, people that were lifelong Republicans to people who were just apolitical public servants who somewhere in those years blew the whistle either about presidential misconduct or wrongdoing inside of an agency. And it was fascinating to me. It was fascinating to me because not only were these stories harrowing and gripping and emotional, But Anthony, I asked every one of these whistleblowers we spoke to at the end that whether they regretted it after detonating their lives. Did they regret it? And not a single person told me they did. Now, they may have said they would have done some things differently, but they all said they still would have blown the whistle. And it's hard to find things these days that are inspiring and uplifting. And that gave me a much needed boost. And back to your earlier point, no one has to have sympathy for me. Like you, I went into the political arena wide eyed. I knew I would take punches. And life's been good since then. I found and married the love of my life. I'm 18 months sober. But the thing that I would say is we need to really protect those people in our society who don't expect that they're going to enter that gladiator arena. And we've got a lot of brave public servants around the country, all the way to the local level, people who stood up against the electoral coup, who never expected to be in the fray like that and took some really brutal punches. And that would just be my one exhortation to your listeners is when you see those people getting attacked and experiencing the crowdsourced intimidation, come to their defense because they need it. They didn't sign up for this.
All right, so I'm down to the part of the podcast where I read out my 5 words. After I read somebody's book, I think about some of these things, put it together. I need you to respond to these 5 words, and then you can put a paragraph, a word, whatever you think. Okay, start with word number 1, Biden.
I'm thinking about this one. At risk of losing.
Democracy.
At risk of losing.
Trump.
I wish I gave the same answer.
At risk of winning, right?
Biggest loser. Fundamental threat to democracy as we know it.
Yeah, but also a symbol of something gone wrong in the country because he is an avatar. He represents a very large group of people.
He really does. And I don't have anything against those people. I've got extended family members who are MAGA voters and friends who are so frustrated with Washington. But I think they're being duped. I know they're being duped by a guy who says he's going to be their retribution. And all he's actually saying is, elect me so I can go get retribution for myself.
Yeah, exactly. He only cares about himself. His message is, I only care about myself. MAGA, the concept MAGA.
Populism.
2024.
A year of reckoning. I think that next year will be the most important year for our democracy of any since I've been alive. I'm approaching the back half of my 30s, and we've been through some times of turmoil. Anthony, you were there in New York on 9/11. We all witnessed those years together after the fact. That felt like it was going to be the watershed moment for democracy, is how we responded to that. We saw what happened with Trump's rise. We saw his presidency. I think all of it will pale in comparison to the moment of decision we have next year, which, if it is Trump versus Biden, is the most black and white choice we've ever had in the modern history of the Republic about whether to keep democracy alive or whether to roll it up and throw it away. I think that's really what next year will come down to if we continue on this path.
So well said. The title of your book is Blowback, a warning to save democracy from the next Trump. It's got everything that you would expect to have in a book about our current political zeitgeist. Your personal observations and your personal stories are amazing. And your descriptions of the people are great. So I enjoyed the book a great deal. And I really appreciate you coming on Open Book.
Well, and I appreciate you talking to me for it. I think some of the punchiest quotes in the entire tome are Anthony Scaramucci quotes. So you were very gracious to give me your time and insight about why we're in this place we're in. So Anthony, thank you. And
well, I appreciate you including me, but it was fun to do those interviews with you.
Well, I'm grateful for you, brother. And thanks for what you continue to do.
Russia, past, going all the way back to Stalin, are the past and present masters of disinformation. I had the privilege interviewing a former Czechoslovakian intelligence officer. He specialized in disinformation. And I asked him what you were doing in the 1960s compared to where we are now. And he just put his hands up in the air and said, this is the golden age for people. He said, what I used to do is I was a professional peddler of lies. I would seize upon targets in US audiences, race relations and domestic race relations in the US. He said, I would seize upon that and I would exploit it. And he said, this now social media environment that we're in would have been a godsend. I couldn't have even dreamed of something like that. So not only in terms of volume, it's easier and quicker, cheaper than ever before. It's quicker than all of those things than ever before in history to spread disinformation. But there's also this thing that's going on in the US, it seems to me, of just being willing to believe objectively false information.
So joining us now on Open Book is Calder Walton. He's a renowned intelligence and global security scholar. He's also a historian at the Harvard University Kennedy School of Government, which is obviously I'm an alumnus of the law school there. Although when you bring that up, it's like humble bragging, so I'm not really allowed to bring that up anymore. But you wrote this amazing book, which we're going to get into right now, called Spies, the Epic Intelligence War Between the East and West. I learned so much in your book. I'm very grateful for you writing it, also the contribution of it. There's a lot to unpack there, but let's start with you. Why did you become so interested in intelligence and in the acquisition of military and civil intelligence?
Well, first and foremost, thanks for having me here, Anthony. It's great to be with you on Open Book. How did I get interested in this? Well, as an undergrad, I read a book called The Mitrokhin Archive, which was this expose about the secret history of the KGB. And it was written by the person that then became my doctoral supervisor, now friend and mentor, Christopher Andrew in Cambridge. And I went to him, and he's really the most incredible scholar and mentor, very humble. And he said, look, there's more research than we can possibly do in a lifetime on all of this. So if you want to do a PhD, you're pushing at an open door. So Anthony, that was just one thing that led to another. He then asked if when I was doing my PhD in Cambridge in England, he said, would you be interested in helping me write on a part-time basis, doing research for MI5's official 100-year history? I said, let me think about that for a minute. So that took about a nanosecond to say, yeah, that sounds like an incredible.
All right. So that begs the following question. Okay. Who does it better? Right? Nobody does it better. So is it MI5, MI6? Is it the KGB or the GRU as they're called now? Is it the CIA? Who does it the best?
I think that begs the question, what do we mean by it? If we're talking about stealing secrets, intelligence collection, the vast hoovering up of intelligence, you got to say that's the KGB historically. And who knows about Russia today, China today? They do it if we mean acquisition of intelligence.
Yeah, stealing of secrets.
Yeah,
application of military technology.
Exactly.
Knowing what we're doing before we know what we're doing.
That's it.
Right.
But if we're talking about if it means not only the collection of intelligence, but then analyzing it and disseminating it and getting it to decision makers that actually are going to listen to it, that's definitely not the autocratic regimes, Soviets in the past, Russia, China today. That's Western liberal democracies. And I'd say that Britain, I would say this, but being from the UK, but historically, the British intelligence community has punched far above its weight on the international stage.
Well, remember, they had the imperial system going as well, right? So
they had
the Commonwealth.
That's right.
They've been able to use that system to their advantage, right? Ian Fleming and John le Carré explained that to all of us over the years.
And they were bang on. And the thing about John le Carré is that he was both an MI5 and an MI6 officer. He knew what he was talking about. But in terms of the today, the bulk capabilities, nothing can come close in the West to the U.S. intelligence community with its resources.
Right. Plus the
18 different agencies, Yes. So I think we've got Space Force now. And so, nothing comes close. NSA and GCHQ in the UK literally intertwined across the Atlantic with systems codependent. So
Have you? I'm assuming you have. Have you ever looked at the presidential daily brief, an archived one, or?
yep,
Okay.
yep, for sure. And they're some of them are declassified and I used them in the book in the 1960s.
Yeah. The declassified one. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna say a couple things to you. I want you to react to these things,
Okay.
because you're talking
Okay.
to somebody that when I read the brief for the first time, I was alarmed by the brief.
Interesting.
I found I'm going to say three things to you. I want you to react to all three. Okay. The CIA analyst that briefed me, he said to me that there are work horses in the government and show horses in the government.
Okay.
And you'll know very quickly who the work horses are, Anthony, and who the show horses. Do you agree with him?
Well, you always need to. I'm gonna sort of try to put it perhaps in more diplomatic terms. You always need to have the people that are at the front of the house and then the back of the house.
Right.
But I can see where you're going with this. I think I know who perhaps the rest of the intelligence community would probably regard the CIA as the show horse. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. I do think so. Okay.
Yeah.
Because
But
you've got a lot of stuff going on.
We also say that presumably a lot of, as usual, people that call others show horses, there might be a tinge of jealousy there. Let's perhaps say that.
Right. Okay. Well said. The other thing that was said to me, and I want you to react to, is that, man, here's what we think we know, but a lot of stuff in that brief is proportioned, meaning it's percentages. We have a 50% chance that this is correct. We have a 70% chance that this is correct. It's not like Hollywood, Calder, where, okay, Bin Laden is in the house and here's how we know, and now we're going to send a SEAL team to get him. I mean, there was a lot of vagary and a lot of uncertainty in the decision-making process. Is that correct based on your research?
Both historically, and I have to say that is really good to hear in a weird way, and I'll explain why. The worst thing to do would be to be presenting analysis and to give the customers, in this case you, a false sense of the...
No, there was none of that.
Exactly.
No, there was
So
none
if
of that.
it's intelligence, if we're in the intelligence business, there aren't certainties. This operates in an area of gray, right? And I think that the yardstick of a decent analysis is being honest and saying, we just don't know. This might be a 51% chance, 49% chance, what have you. As long as the customer, you, is aware of the risk inherent within that analysis of we are operating within the gray. As you said, it's not like Hollywood where it's there have been, let's be honest, in the recent past, some extraordinary intelligence failures on the part of the CIA on briefings. Sure. George Tenet's slam dunk, we all remember that about WMD. That's an example of where the caveats about the reporting and the analysis are airbrushed out, and it's presented in a way that doesn't reflect the the risks inherent. So that's reassuring to me from my perspective that you were given all those health warnings.
So that's part of it.
Yeah.
Going to keep going here if you don't.
Can I ask follow up though? I mean, did that then lead I imagine as a customer might be like, well, why are you giving me this then if you don't know what the...
well, that's interesting, because what I would say, and what was said to me in sort of the preamble of the briefing was that there's just so many things that we don't know, but these are the things that we're worried about, or these are the things that are going to reach the president's desk, where he's going to have to make a decision, or in some day she will have to make a decision. But you're going to be making this decision with some shots being fired in the dark. You won't actually know, and we don't actually know. And so all of that's accurate, right? I think this is important for our listeners and viewers, because I want them to read your book. I'm going to give away some of the plot lines in your book, but I want them to read your book because your book is so compelling about the reality of the situation, not the fictionalized stuff that people will read or even watch in the movies. You've got, real life situations going on, life and death situations. And what we both know is a lot of guesswork in it. Isn't that the case, Calder?
That's absolutely, you summarized it really well, Anthony. So it's, two levels, the world of espionage and this wilderness of mirrors, as it's been called, nothing is 100%. So the yardstick for on the US side the yardstick for the most confidence you can have in an assessment is, I believe the phrase is highly confident, or not even very high confidence.
Yes.
It's something like this, okay? So, which to the layperson doesn't actually sound that, it's not. I mean, you're a lawyer. You remember, Anthony. I'm a recovering lawyer as well, I should say. But you remember the legal. It's not close to beyond reasonable doubt.
No.
That level.
No. Yeah,
we're groping in there, and this is what we think seems likely to happen. That's the reality of intelligence. And the other thing is, of course, if an assessment, if a problem lands on the president's desks, as the phrase goes, it's never going to be an easy decision. It's only the tough things land on the president.
Exactly, because it would have been resolved by one of the other 5,000 people in his government.
Precisely.
And so, and then the last thing from the first briefing that I had was it's always a tough decision. And so it looked prima facie that the capture and the death of Osama bin Laden and the capture of the intelligence assets from his home was a net positive, but it also had consequential collateral damage. We upset a sovereign nation, Pakistan.
Yep.
We probably had to give them more aid as a result of that. Yep. We also upset the region because it's a very tough neighborhood. Yep. You don't want the U.S., who's perceived to be an imperialist, going into sovereign nations without their permission.
Yep.
And so that set alarm bells off in the Middle East and probably set us back diplomatically. So every time the president's making a decision or she's making a decision, there's some good things that can come out of it, but there's also going to be some collateral damage. Is that a fair statement based on your assessment?
Absolutely. I think that time and time again, we see throughout history is particularly the US with all of its power and might, during the Cold War, does something in order to solve a particular problem. And then that sets off a cascade of not even known unknowns, unknown unknowns, and again, I think that's the duty of the intelligence community, is to warn about what are likely future scenarios where there could be what we're talking about here, Anthony, is like thing of blowback, where one thing leads to a succession of other events, and then it blows back on the U.S. in some way or another.
Right, exactly. So we always have that. We always have that risk. Okay. So in the 1930s, I don't remember the exact date, but Henry Luce, who was the founder of Time magazine, was in Russia. This predates the war. Okay, but Stalin is now in charge. Trotsky is dead. He is talking with him at dinner. He says he's going to smash the United States into a million pieces. And Luce says, well, how are you going to do that? He said, well, you don't understand. I'm going to use the KGB. I'm going to use our disinformation programming. I'm going to use the wave of lies. You're a mongrel nation. You're not unified by one race or one genealogy. There's multiple bloodlines, and a result of which there's a lot of ethnic and tribal hatreds in your country. And I'm going to smash you to smithereens using this campaign of disinformation. We won't need to take over the United States. The United States will fall from within.
Wow.
Now, what he got wrong at the time was the love that my grandparents had for the country, immigrating from Italy and others. What he got wrong is that they were all focused on their own economic aspirational opportunity and less on hating upon each other, although there was biases and prejudices, as there has been tribally for time immemorial. Okay, what he also got wrong was the great unification that the U.S. would have during the war and then in the post-war environment. And since we talk about stovetops in your book and chimney, stovetops coming out of the houses, we were stovetopped into the media where it was fairly centralized. So the information that was washing over the United States was fairly centralized. So we all had uniform or mainstream ideas. But that's no longer the case. You and I know that Prigozhin, who is now part of the Wagner Group, one of Putin's old chefs, very well chronicled in the book by Catherine Belton, Putin's People. He develops these server farms and creates these core identities. And he uses this age-old theory from Stalin, from the KGB, to create tribal disinformation, ethnic hatreds, sow unrest in the United States, push the Brexit agenda on the UK citizens, make them feel nationalistic, make them feel racial sympathies towards themselves and against others. He's doing the same thing in France. And because of this splintering of the media, it now seems to be working. What Stalin said was going to work 100 years ago, Calder's, that didn't work, but it now seems to be working. What's your reaction to all that?
Well, I don't. So I agree with what you just said. I don't know the specific about Henry Luce in the Soviet Union, but what Stalin was talking about, and then was been repeated by subsequent Kremlin leaders. These are the so-called Soviet active measures. This is what in the US what we would call, or in the covert action. So these are dirty tricks, political warfare we call it, and Russia past, going all the way back to Stalin, probably even the Tsarist regime actually, are the past and present masters of disinformation. So I had the privilege when I was writing the book, interviewing a former Czechoslovakian intelligence officer who defected to the US in 1969, just after the Prague Spring. He saw the Soviet tanks rolling in and said, I need to get out of here. He specialized in the Czech intelligence service that worked for the KGB, essentially as a satellite service. He specialized in disinformation. And I asked him, okay, so with this, what you were doing in the 1960s and even before, compared to where we are now, and he just put his hands up in the air and said, this is the golden age for people. He said, what I used to do is I was a professional peddler of lies. I would seize upon targets in US audiences, like you just mentioned, Anthony, that Stalin said, race relations and domestic race relations in the US. He said, I would seize upon that and I would exploit it. And he said, this now social media environment that we're in, would have been a godsend. I couldn't have even dreamed of something like that. So not only in terms of volume, it's easier and quicker, cheaper than ever before, as Prigozhin and his troll farms revealed. It's quicker than all of those things than ever before in history to spread disinformation. But there's also this thing that's going on in particularly here in the US, it seems to me, of just being willing to believe objectively false information. Yes. Okay, so that's changed, and I don't know if that's if that is the social media environment of something's going on in our sort of cognition. That's something for like behavioral scientists, psychologists to get into.
No, it's interesting. I mean, all of that seems to be happening contemporaneously while we are trying to fight back the beast, right? Because you and I both know that we've got to be right 1,000%, right? We have to go. We had to bat 1,000. We have to be right every time. They only have to be right once.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Okay.
An impossible task, I would say.
Okay. So let's go to your book. Okay, which is a fascinating book about this war between the East and West. I want to address Vladimir Putin for a second.
Yeah.
Is Putin the master spy of the narrative that he conjured up for himself?
Oh, it's a great question. I would argue absolutely not. So he makes much of his KGB past, that he worked for the KGB's Foreign Intelligence Department, the first chief directorate. He was stationed in Dresden, as your listeners may be aware, and he witnessed firsthand, the story goes, of the collapse of the Soviet Union around him. Okay, so he has made much of this in the 1990s, and then when he got into power. In fact, Dresden was a sideshow for the KGB in East Germany. The real action was up in Berlin. Okay, that's the first thing. The second thing is I've got it on very good authority from a CIA source interviewed on the condition of anonymity that he has good information, reliable information, that Putin wanted to become a deep cover, so-called illegal. Okay, this is the Russian, Soviet and Russian deep cover operatives, like in the series, like in the TV show, The Americans, that you may have seen. Great show, by the way.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. He wanted to become one of them and failed the language test. So since then, he's tried to peddle this image of both him as a master spy and then also as the KGB as the sort of master intelligence service. It was second to none in the world in terms of intelligence collection, stealing secrets, bribing people, exploiting them, you name it, blackmail. But in terms of analysis, the whole system never allowed for robust telling truth to power. You see that from Stalin's time through to Putin today. And I think, so let me put it this way. Putin, his foreign intelligence director at the moment, the SVR, which is the successor to the KGB, his foreign intelligence director, Sergei Narishkin, is also the head of Russia's historical society. So that's like that the director of the CIA being the head of the American Historical Society. What's going on there? Well, what's going on there is some pretty weird use of history and making Russia's intelligence services in the past seem more successful than they were. You scratch the surface, not only is Putin not the master spy that he wants to be, but also some of the massive Soviet intelligence successes in the past, they were actually owed more to the dedication of the communist agents handing over secrets that they had than the tradecraft of Russia's intelligence services. And we see it, Anthony, we see it closer to our own time with Russia's intelligence services. After 2016, there was a perception and Russian election meddling, not getting into the whole thing of like the actual impact of that on the election, but it was certainly unambiguously the case that Russia was on Putin's orders trying to do that. After that, we had some narrative, particularly in the US, of sort of Putin as the master puppeteer. But actually, there's been a succession of incredible Russian intelligence failures under his watch. Deep cover spy networks being wound up. And then the most disastrous decision that he made that seems pretty clear to me is an intelligence failure is his decision to invade Ukraine in 2022. This is a colossal intelligence failure, and Putin is primarily responsible for it.
Is he winning or losing that war?
Ukraine, to be determined, I'm afraid. Here's the thing that look at what's happened just yesterday. Sweden's joined NATO, so his master plan doesn't seem to be working out. But I still agree with what CIA Director Bill Burns said at the outset of the war, which is this is a war that Putin can't afford to lose. Okay, he's nailed his reputation to it. It's everything. He's not gonna. I don't see how he's gonna allow this to go badly for Russia, and I fear my worst fear is about the use of a tactical nuclear weapon to get a victory out of a defeat. So the better that Ukrainians do, the more encircled Putin feels now by NATO, the more the chances I think he's going to do something drastic. And I'm particularly worried about the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant.
Yeah, well, I know they've been calling on that now for several months because of all that. But let me just ask you this: do you feel? I want to phrase this properly. Is he in peril now? No matter what the outcome is, because it has not really gone well for him optically, not in the world of public opinion, not in the internal unrest been displayed in the Soviet Union for the Russians, former Soviet Union, also the Prigozhin situation. Has he been sufficiently personally imperiled at this point?
For his rule, I mean, he's certainly been damaged. But again, he's not going to, it's not like we're just going to see Putin go, okay, well, you know what, that was a mistake.
No, he can't. He can't afford to do that. No, we know that.
The maker and the breaker in this whole situation will be China. So I don't think actually Putin, you mentioned, in terms of the perception internationally, sure, this is a catastrophe from our perspective for Putin. Why would he do this? But then there's a lot of, first and foremost, it's the maker and the breaker of whether it's a failure or not will be Xi in China, and then look at the non-aligned, so-called non-aligned countries, the global South, and their perceptions, a lot of whom are sitting on the fence. So it's not. You talk to others from other places in the world outside of, Europe and North America. It's not as clear cut as the conversation that you and I have just had, I think.
This is a tremendously cynical thing to say, but bear with me. Success for Joe Biden?
Is it a success for Joe Biden of where the war is going?
What has unfolded over the last, call it, a year and a half?
Yeah, I think that it's been remarkable to see U.S. leadership again. I speak as a European.
Yeah.
And it's just like, where was America for so long? We don't need to get into that, Anthony, but that
we can get into it because, here's what happened. We both know it. When Clinton left, we had still very high standing in the world. Yep. He was producing a budget surplus.
Yeah.
He was running the world off the George Kennan bipartisan commitment to leadership and freedom and containing autocracies around the world to the best of his capability. And Bush and Cheney, they blew it to pieces because they got the gun off the bird going into Iraq.
Yep.
Big intelligence failure there, but it was also designed to help President Bush win re-election. They wanted that war.
That's right.
And they wanted that war before before Labor Day of 2003 because they wanted him to get reelected.
That's it.
Okay. And so they knew that would galvanize the American people. And so this is unbelievable levels of cynicism. And you and I both know this, but maybe some of our listeners need to hear it again. We went to war without a tax increase, the first time in U.S. history that we created a war like that without a tax increase. And we blew a hole in our budget that we never recovered from. We're 25 trillion into that budget deficit now as a result of that bad strategic planning and allowing the Congress to lose the fiscal discipline. And unfortunately, and this saddens me, but you and I both know people in the agency. This is right out of the writings of bin Laden. Bin Laden said in 1998-99, he'd hit America. Yeah. America would overreact, spend trillions of dollars bombing mud huts and sand pits, and he would weaken the American empire. Yep. And so right now he's dead, but it's probably 3-0 bin Laden, top of the 5th inning.
Yeah.
Because everything he said that we were going to do, we did. And we have a more divided country. We have the Patriot Act, which gives us less civil liberties. We have this national security state and the NSA overseeing everything, which may or may not make us safer in some ways, but certainly less free. So here we are. What am I missing, sir?
No. And then you throw in the economic disaster of 2008 into the mix. Mm-hmm. I'd like to just also pick at a thread that the way that you've just laid it all out there, that for Putin, I mean, the damage that the decision to go to war in Iraq has caused, not just for U.S. foreign policy and perception of the U.S., but also for people around the world like Putin, who saw the U.S. involved expressly in regime change. And you look at Putin's speeches from back then, once the honeymoon period of war and of counterterrorism was over, and it was over pretty quickly, by the way, with Putin's regime, what could he point to? He said, well, this is a regime that just does what it wants, the US. And if you look at Putin's Munich security speech in 2007, he's calling for an overhaul of the post-Cold War international security system. He said that the US is an empire. It's using freedom and democracy as a way to boss other countries around. He says, that's not true democracy. This is, Anthony, it's basically the same speech as he gave on the eve of the war in Ukraine with Xi, that joint conference. Mm-hmm. Yeah. He's been saying the same thing. So we can't actually criticize. Like all dictators, there's a logic there, okay?
Of course.
And you don't have to. I mean, you
The best
you don't agree
propaganda
with.
has a kernel of truth, right?
Yeah, right.
Doesn't the best
There's a lot.
propaganda have a kernel of truth?
There's a logic. You have to be able to understand the mindset.
Right.
And for me, as you've pointed out, so much of this turns on the war in Iraq, and it goes back to that and that decision of, the as the British government, the head of MI6 at the time flew over to Washington in the spring of '03 and came back, wrote a report back. It's now all out in this public inquiry in the UK, the Chilcot report, and said they're going to go to war. They've already made the decision and they're fixing the intelligence around it.
Right.
So that's a catastrophe of intelligence, allowing, like, where was the failure on both sides, both decision makers cooking the intelligence, looking for things, fruit picking it, and then the intelligence community with that, for example, as we all know, this source that was the one source, curveball. I mean, who has one source for anything?
Right.
And just the idea that we would use that. So it was a failure across the board. Failure on intelligence collection, failure on intelligence analysis, failure of dissemination, and then an abject failure on the part of decision makers that are already going to do what they wanted to do. Seems to me.
So you obviously, I could let you go forever because you're a brilliant guy and I'm enjoying the conversation, but these podcasts unfortunately do come to an end. I have 5 words that I have to. I'm going to say the word. You can have a 1-word reaction, a paragraph reaction.
Okay.
I'm going to say the word. I want to get your immediate reaction.
I'm
Okay,
in the
you ready?
hot seat here, aren't I?
You're in the hot seat. You're in the hot seat. You ready?
Hit me.
Russia.
Yeah. Russia problem. So we've got a Russia problem. We haven't got a Putin problem.
Right.
Okay. That's my reaction, is that we need to understand that if Putin disappears, the chances are he's going to be replaced by somebody who thinks very similarly to him.
Yeah. Yeah. And we and you remember Halford Mackinder, right? And so Mackinder basically, so he was an Oxford Don.
Yeah.
He was knighted in the mid-19th century, said you can't let any one country control the entire Eurasian continent. It'll be a disaster for the West. You can't let the Russians link up with the Chinese.
Right.
And if you read our State Department documents or your Foreign Service documents, we're all concerned about that 200 years later.
Yeah.
Okay. the USA.
In a terrible crisis. Divided. We need to learn how to agree to disagree with each other again.
China.
Unprecedented intelligence challenge, threat to U.S. national security.
Yeah, that was the
Unambiguous.
biggest. So that was my biggest takeaway from your book, is that I haven't spent enough time understanding the magnitude of what they're working on in terms of the way they're absorbing information. Frankly, the people that they put on the street here is overwhelming, including the police departments that they have in our own country,
But then also, Anthony, I mean, in your other field, in commerce and business, the Chinese national security laws, basically Chinese business with the outside world, you have Chinese intelligence working as a silent partner. There is no such thing as a truly independent Chinese venture, and I think that this is the key to understanding the Chinese espionage threat that we face in the US. Is
no question.
It's not just about spy agencies. It is cross domain, and the thing is, this isn't. I'm not actually very political. This isn't a right thing or a left thing. This is just, you just look at and you speak to people in the FBI, and they're like opening an investigation into China every 12 hours. I mean, this is out of control.
So we, as you point out in the book, the Cold War's still on. 2 more words. Ready? Great Britain. Your alma mater, your former country.
Yeah. I was actually born in this country, so I have a healthy view on both. in a not as bad a situation as the US, but not in a great place, struggling to find a place in the world. Yeah. There's a phrase, an English phrase called plodding along, and I think Britain is plodding along at the moment, trying to figure out what it stands for again after Brexit.
Yeah. Well, I have a love affair with your former country. I enjoyed my time there. Intelligence, Cold War, the Cold War, current Cold War,
new Cold War on at the moment between the West and what we stand for, and Russia and China. Intelligence undergoing a revolution. And the future of intelligence is not clandestine services, that kind of thing. It's open source, commercially available intelligence. And what intelligence agencies are trying to figure out at the moment is how to exploit that. How do they link up with, there are outfits like Bellingcat, that are doing fantastic open source reporting that are, and intelligence agencies are saying, okay, it's a game changer. How do we then incorporate that and provide a margin to our customers in government? So intelligence undergoing a massive revolution at the moment.
Well, you've been very generous with your time. I'm very grateful to you for coming on. Your book is spectacular. The author, Calder Walton, of Spies, the Epic Intelligence War Between East and West. I enjoyed our time together. My producer is going to be a little bit mad at me that I didn't go that in depth into the book, but I want my viewers and listeners to read the book. And I think listening to you speak about these issues will encourage them to go out and buy the book, which I did and I loved, and which is why I reached out to you. And thank you for accepting my invitation.
Are you kidding? Thank you. The pleasure was all mine. It was really great, and hope to carry on the conversation going forward.